Let's not worry about what's normal. Everyone is different.
I think I feel better already.
He's all business, isn't he?
Why is it so hard to just enjoy things?
I never expect him to be any other way than what he is.
Nobody knows what I'm doing. Good for Mystique.
Are you being a concerned daddy?
I just want to make sure you're aware of that.
What's your title here? I didn't think it through.
That's honest.
This never happened. It will shock you how much it never happened.
Welcome to Mad Men, the weekly show where we discuss a show that used to come out weekly. Each week, we take a close look at, and I can't talk. I'm too full from Thanksgiving, and it's just, I'm healing over. Okay, I'll try it again. Each week, we take a close look at an episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which ran from 2007 to 2015, gearing our conversation around the conversation the show is having about snobby French films from the early 60s. And I have a couple people with me here who make watching Mad Men truly great. But first, I got to ask him, why can't Will Ashton have salt? Because we love him.
Well, I like that you instantly dated this episode, not even a minute into it, because this isn't going to
30 seconds.
I was going to say, this isn't even going to come out until close to Christmas, right?
Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know.
But they'll know that we did this around Thanksgiving.
There you go. Yeah, today is Black Friday. It is November 25th, 2022, and it is approximately 12:06 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, just so everyone knows exactly what's happening.
Thanks, Will. That was really helpful of you. And while we've been having fun, me and Will just goofing off and chatting over here, it sounds like Michael's in his office playing with paddleball. I mean, I hope that's paddleball. Maybe I'm just hearing things. Hey, Mike.
Oh.
The best part of this episode was that visual gag. I will say that. And Will, I take offense that you dated this podcast with East Coast time, because two of us are in the West Coast.
I'm okay with it though, because Mad Men takes place. Podcast. No, Mad Men takes place in New York.
John, I know you want to seem more important than you are, okay? Why don't you tell the folks where you are, okay? Where is the internet, California, Jonathan?
The San Francisco Bay Area? I don't understand what this is. I thought you were going to say, like, oh, I'm from the East Coast originally, so I'm not really one of you. You grew up in the West Coast, Mike, and so I'm not real.
I guess that is true. I'm the only true West Coaster. I've never lived in the East Coast time zone.
You adopted me, and I appreciate it.
Wow.
You know, kind of like somebody adopted Peggy's baby.
Yeah, not her sister.
No, she was about 20 months pregnant, and as we saw in this episode. Oh yeah, so before we talk about this episode, The New Girl, which is episode 5 of season 2, Mike, we missed you last week when we talked about 3 Sundays, which is one of the best episodes of the season, probably, I think, and which for me is a big deal because I don't like a lot of episodes in season 2 that much. But Mike, did you like the episode as much as Will and I did? We had a fun convo.
Yeah, I really like 3 Sundays just with the way it's framed. I think it's super fun that they, span 3 weeks in this but focus so much on Peggy. Also, I do love some like religious allegories and themes. John knows this, but that is no longer part of my life, but a part of my background. So I really empathize with Peggy's character of having to be forced to go into like the church world. And also, I just fucking love me some Colin Hanks. Like, put him in more things, and I will just watch it. At this point, I'd rather say Colin than Tom. Yeah. I'll be honest.
Will and I were just talking about Colin Hanks's new Peacock show that he's in that literally no one's watching, and I don't even remember the name of it.
Well, that's because it's on Peacock. If you want something to be successful, don't put it on Peacock.
I like Saved by the Bell. Saved by the Bell is really great. And that was a Peacock show, but then they canceled it after 2 seasons because it was on Peacock. So yeah,
Peacock just sucks. It's the only streaming service I don't have.
You have Paramount Plus?
I have Paramount Plus.
You have Criterion?
Well, I guess not, but they have Criterion on HBO Max.
Do you have Crackle Plus?
I do not have Crackle Plus.
Do you have?
I'm talking about the main streamers. I do have Crunchyroll.
Well, I think we can leave it there. He has Crunchyroll, that's all I needed to really know.
Gotta watch Chainsaw Man.
That's right. Unfortunately,
I know about that show.
Will doesn't watch Chainsaw Man or any anime. His roommate does, though. So
yeah,
we'll have to have his roommate on the show instead.
Yeah, I don't watch anime.
That is the biggest character confusion I've ever heard of. Like, Will, you're such a movie guy and such like a media person, and I am quite shocked that you don't watch anime. I would have bet $100 on it.
Really?
$100.
Yeah.
I guess, Mike, you just don't know Will as well as you thought you did, because I definitely
I'd sure like
have
to.
never questioned Will's disinterest in anime, because I feel like I know him at this point. And it is I think like Will's literal like response if I'm ever like, check out this anime, he's like, I don't need that nerd shit in my life. Get out of here.
Yeah, I always make fun of John for getting into nerd shit like anime. I quote this tweet a lot, but I don't think I've ever said to you, Mike, this is my response about anime. Anime is like cocaine. I have friends who are super into it, but I've seen what's done to their lives, and I'm staying far away from it.
Well, we're having all the fun. So, okay, if we could start talking about New Girl, I did want to bring up something. The New Girl.
It's Jess.
It's Peg. It's Joan. Not Joan. It's Jane. Yeah,
Jane. Jane. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Call Jane.
I almost did Jane as my my username for our video chat here, but
I wish I did Jane. Okay,
Ken Grosgrove. Yeah, no, I was going to mention Will.
Yeah.
In episode 1 of season 2,
yes,
you thought your number one guess for who Dawn sends the letter to, was Rachel.
Yeah.
And Mike and I had to sit back here and be like, "Oh, poor little baby, poor baby Will. No, it's not Rachel, because we see her in this episode." How did it feel to have your guesses, your intelligence questioned by this episode of Mad Men?
Well, yeah, I was between. I remember I was between Maggie and Rachel. I guess
you did mention Midge.
Sorry, Midge.
Yeah, we don't have a Maggie in the show yet. Ever, I don't know.
So, I mean, I guess one of my guesses, or one of my hypothetical guesses, is still on the table. But yeah, it does not seem to be Rachel from what I've seen in this episode.
And that's okay. That's okay, because we got our Rachel moment in this episode. And also in this episode, we find out what happened to Peggy. And Will, you were also wrong last week when you said that, Don doesn't know Peggy was pregnant. And I had to hold my tongue. I mean, if Michael had been there, he probably would have given the whole game away. Probably would have been like, wait, Will.
I would have blabbed.
Well, you know what? I'm actually kind of glad I got these two things wrong, only because it will finally dissuade you two from thinking I've watched this season in full.
I was going to bring that up. I was like, oh, wait, Will hasn't actually watched this then. So we finally can put that whole conspiracy theory to rest. Finally.
There's still 9 more things he'll know about, but it'll be fun when we find the things he doesn't.
Right.
Well, I will say...
Oh, yeah, I did know Don was a communist.
The one thing I did know, and one of the things I remember very vividly, was the Don's arm in the sleeve and then the car accident. So I did remember those. Now I kept waiting for when does that episode show up, and we got it this week.
Yeah, we're winding down, right? We're almost we're getting close to the halfway point of season 2 already. We're kind of just trucking along here. Now, this episode came out August 2008, like the last one, and it was directed by Jennifer Getzinger. I think this is her first time directing an episode of the show, and I'll double check that, of course. Also, Robin Veith returns to write the episode. We've seen her write plenty of episodes of the show so far. And yeah, I'm not seeing Jennifer Getzinger directing any other episodes of the show. I think she was working for the show in a different capacity, if I'm not mistaken. And I think she was a script supervisor, but I could be wrong about that, before they had her direct. She doesn't direct any other episodes of this season, but I think she is going to come back next season as director. So, tidbit for you all there. Mike, one thing that Will and I talked about last week that you might find some interest in was how the ratings have been going for the show since season 1. So Will and I talked last week about how the highest rated episode in terms of viewership, not critical ratings, but in terms of how many people were watching Babylon. So episode 6 of the first season, highest rated so far and counting. In fact, I don't think any episode, including in season 2, ever topped Babylon. At least for what's reported. There are some episodes in season 1 we don't have official ratings for. That said,
that surprises me.
Doesn't it? But we do see a big spike for season 2, episode 1, and it almost is as high as Babylon, but not quite, for those who think young. And then the ratings kind of plummet from there. Last week's 3 Sundays was the lowest rated of season 2 so far, and I think the entire season, which is wild to me because it's such a good episode. But I think because it was so good, the word of mouth really helped this episode, The New Girl, because this one has the highest ratings of season 2 since episode 1. So that's my guess, is that people were like, oh yeah, Maman's back, and we're going to do the twist again, like we did last summer. Yeah,
it just feels like this is where it's picking up, right? Because you don't have Don being Don in the beginning of this season. He's trying to be good guy Don. And John, I know you've talked about it a lot in the past couple of podcasts, just how much you don't like Don this season. And I think a lot of people feel that way, right? You come to Mad Men for the intrigue, to figure out who Don is, for these twists and mysteries. And up till this point, it kind of feels like we've been eating our vegetables. But now we're starting to pour some butter on the vegetables, makes it a little bit tastier, and soon there'll be cheese on it, and all of a sudden the main course is coming.
Which is wild because Flight 1 is such a consequential episode, but it is sort of like Don being a paragon and Pete kind of being more the main character. So yeah, there's something to that.
Well, I mean, you say that, Mike, but I feel like this episode has the scene that John would relate to the most, which is him in the car talking, and they're like, what do you like? He's like, I don't like anything. I can't relate to anything. Well, name something you like. Well, I do like the movies. And she's like, oh yeah? What movie do you like? And then which film did she list? Or what film did he list, I mean?
He said La Notte.
Yeah.
Well, she talks about, have you seen the foreign ones? They're
Yeah.
so sexy.
And I feel like John could just sit there watching this for the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th time and being like, ah, yes, the cinema.
Thanks, Will.
You think that's the one you would relate to the most? You don't think it's when Don says, when Don says, see, I mean,
John
confusing him.
I like
He
this.
says,
I like keep mixing us up.
I feel nothing. That's John Negroni. At the end of every episode,
anything.
well, guys, this was a fun time. And John says, I feel nothing.
Unfortunately, that's a little bit too close to home there. I'm just glad neither of you were like, oh no, the episode that John would relate to is when Pete's like in the sperm clinic. Ruffling through Pearl Harbor, being like, am I going to use this to...
Believe me, we're going to talk about Pete and his balls pretty soon, but I wanted to kind of build up to that.
Build up to Pete's balls. Okay.
Sure.
In this episode, we get a lot of bombshells. We find out what's happened with Rachel. We find out what specifically happened to Peggy. Because if you recall, Peggy, we kind of jumped, right, to season 2 with no real sort of explanation for what happened. And the implication has been, oh yeah, Peggy, is raising, like her sister is raising her kid. But we get, maybe that's not really the case here. I had a question though from the outset, and it's a big question because it impacts, I think, this season in general, and it relates to something Mike already brought up about how viewers, like people watching this in 2008, maybe they didn't like Don as much. But I want to know, do you guys think Don likes Bobby Barrett?
No,
Mike
no
shaking
way.
his head. Okay.
I don't think anyone in the world likes Bobby Barrett. I don't like Bobby Barrett. I hate Bobby Barrett.
Is it because she's a feminist?
No, it's because she's like a cliche and 90 years old.
90 years old? Well, okay.
She just feels so old.
Is that it?
Am I
Is that the
wrong?
only thing?
No,
What do you mean, like an old soul?
Things. No, I just think she looks wrinkly and old. No.
Okay.
Especially, she meets Rachel, and you're just like, damn, look what Don had. You cut the Betty, and you're like, what a beaut. And then you cut the Bobby Barrett, and you're like, okay.
You can sense Rachel is just sort of like, I guess I won this relationship.
Yeah.
Although then she looks over to Tilden and is like, well, let's call it a stalemate. Although I'm a Tilden fan. He can get it.
That's Rachel's new husband. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah,
right
she
now?
married a Jewish man.
Yeah. He just seems, I don't know. I mean, I do like the disposition between the two, where Rachel was seemingly kind of the most, down the line, straight and narrow kind of person. And Don
turned her off Don ruined Gentiles for her.
I guess so. And then we have, Don having I guess a thrice of sorts with Bobby, who is, kind of wildly unpredictable, someone who's a lot more erratic, and just the paths that they have diverged from.
Well, Will, you didn't answer the question for yourself. Do you think Dawn likes Bobby Barrett?
I don't think so. No. I think Dawn had some kind of fledgling respect for her in their first episode together, but I think since then he finds her just kind of a hassle. That's something they kind of deal with.
Why do you think he is doing what he's doing? Why do you think he is?
Because I think he's having an existential crisis, and I think he is in a point of turmoil, and she is giving him the attention and sexual desire that I think he is ultimately seeking for.
Is it that simple?
I think it's harder to get a boner when you have blood thinners, and he's just pumped he can get one, and he likes to use it, and Bobby's the person who helps him get there.
And why Bobby then? Because that tells you that, like, clearly something about her is arousing him, that he's attracted to her for something, right? So what is it?
I mean, it's the power thing, right? She's a similar story of she saw the person she wanted to be and became it. What's the job you want to do to, like, pretend you're that person? She is breaking boundaries. I mean, I think a little bit of what he saw in Rachel of, making something of yourself. Also, I think he sees another person who hates their spouse and recognizes himself in that, and is like, hey, I hate my wife, you hate your husband. Let's be hating them together, having sex over here.
And it was upon that, while watching this episode, that Michael said, you know what? I'm going to propose to my girlfriend and
I
join
proposed
the
to Hannah
institution.
before the episode.
No, the episode came out long before.
No, I've been engaged since August 2008, bro.
Wow, I didn't know that. Weren't you like
I
a
was
baby?
13.
But yes, congratulations. Will and I walked into the podcast studio. We were wondering why everybody was, so excited. And Will was like, I think someone got a visit from the store.
Yeah. And then, Mike was showing that ring around that he got. And I don't know, you kind of broke tradition there. Usually you don't give yourself a ring when you get engaged, but I
give you guys the ring. Michael's giving us the finger right now, but I guess that's
I like that he did like the Family Stone poster style, which I think is that's not a great film, but I like that poster for the Family Stone where it's just looks like the middle finger, but it's the ring finger. You guys remember this at all?
Yes.
No, I was too busy watching anime.
Right, that makes sense.
I was gonna say yes, but also like I want to ask. I've been beating around the bush a little bit. I've been asking you guys questions that aren't that relevant, right? I want to know what you thought of the episode proper, because I know for me, it's an episode I like. I think it's good, but it's just not like Mad Men good to me. So I'm kind of curious if you guys agree or disagree. It looks like Mike is nodding his head. He's saying like new girl, more like old news.
I think you hit it right in the head, man. I think it's a fine episode. I love getting more of Peggy and Dawn's relationship. But it's by no means like when I think about, the upper tiered Mad Men episodes, never do I think about New Girl. But for fifth episode in a season, it's pretty good.
Yeah,
it's
like,
only so much you can
functional.
do in the fifth episode. Yeah.
Yeah, it does certain things that it's more setups for things that are probably going to pay off later. Will, I mean, are you going to come in this episode's defense, or are you going to join the boys?
I mean, I will say, when I was watching the episode, I was thinking this is probably the weakest of the five. I think 5, right? We've seen so far for season 2.
This is episode 5.
Yeah,
and I don't think it's the weakest. I think Benefactor is the weakest.
Okay. Well, I mean, when I was watching it, I was thinking it was the weakest, but when I was reading from the Mad Men carousel, I gained an appreciation for it, namely in that I like that this episode is kind of mirroring the 3-person structure that we saw in the previous episode in 3 Sunday, except that instead of obviously being Peggy, Dawn, and Roger, it's a little bit more about Peggy, Joan, and this new girl, Jane, and how they kind of go through this relationship, as well as with Bobby too, and I guess so it'd be 4. But yeah, just like I do like what the episode's saying about the complexities of women dynamics, both in life and in the workplace. And I think it's an interesting episode. I just don't think it really comes together as well as some of the ones we've seen prior to this, but it's solid. Yeah, certainly not my favorite though.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with this episode. It leaves me wanting, it opens a lot of doors, specifically with Jane and with Joan, that and then we don't go through those doors. And I think that's just a little frustrating. The nice thing is that we do get like some really undue attention on what's going on with Peggy, and it is information that I think is helpful to know, right? Of like what did happen. And the season takes so long to get to that point of like the context that we need, that part of me wonders if it would have been better served earlier in the season. Now, the big thing, right, is that Peggy clearly feels like she owes Dawn something, right? And in some ways, this is kind of her, I think, changing a little bit. I think she gets a lesson from Bobby that is very interesting that I think she applies in this episode. So I do want to talk about that. First, though, what did we like about the episode, right? Because I think there's more to like, obviously, than be less than satisfied with. Mike, is there anything specific in this episode that you thought like really just stands out, that you were just like, this is really good stuff?
Yeah, I think Weiner's smart to do the intertwining storyline of Pete not being able to have kids with Trudy, and us finding out what happened to his, unknown child with Peggy. I just think that's a very, Mad Men way to twist the storylines and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, Trudy is another character to add to the mix that Will was bringing up, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Someone who desperately does want that life, but can't have it, biologically, and feels like, well, then what's the point? I mean, that's a really hard thing to feel, in that day and age, especially when you believe in the social standards, right? And now you're not up to them. But I do really like Pete's reaction. Not that I support his reaction when he finds out that it's not him and it's Trudy.
Good on you, Pete, for telling your wife what for.
Yeah, exactly. But I think I think it develops Pete really well. I think it's just a very Pete fucking response. He's only concerned about himself. He's happy he's not the problem, because he just never feels like a full man. And for the first time, it's not his, lacking of a man that's stopping him from achieving something, right?
He looks down at his dick and is like, a thing like that.
Well, I was gonna say, I think he needed to purchase a ticket to a certain film called Black Adam, because he would realize that he's no Superman.
Or were you waiting for like a?
I was waiting for a pause.
Guys,
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks. It took me a second, Michael, but I got there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what about you, Will?
Same thing with Dawn.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I definitely agree with what Mike was saying. I think the stuff I found probably most entertaining was the Pete Campbell stuff, and certainly probably some of the most heartbreaking stuff was with Pete Campbell. But no, I agree. I think there is something really fascinating about how this episode explores, like, there is this kind of weird desire and repulsion with having children, and like for most of the characters that we see, like having kids is something that's sort of like a business expense in a weird way, like something that they kind of seek because it's something they feel they need to do. And Trudy is one of the few characters outside of maybe Peggy who could really be a great mother, and there is something just very heartbreaking and tragic about how, at least at this point, it seems like she may not be able to have children, and that she is like the one character who is selfless and is willing to, like, love a child in the way that a parent should. And just, she is surrounded by all these characters, including her husband, that can seemingly have kids but not really have the responsibility to raise a kid, because at heart they're children themselves.
I think the thing I like the most about the episode is the Peggy stuff, because I enjoy seeing Peggy showing off her growth a little bit with Bobby, but then Bobby showing her really where she still has some like lessons to learn, because Peggy is still acting like a secretary to Dawn, still extremely subservient to him. And the episode obviously examines like why that is. And obviously there's this weight, there's this debt that Peggy feels like she owes Don, because as it turns out, he's the main driving force in really pushing her out of the mental health state that she was in after she had her baby, and then of course allowing her that second chance to come back and pretend it never happened. But I do like that part of this episode's point is that that's not enough to have like a functional and like human relationship between Don and Peggy, because there are all those moments where Bobby is just like, are you seeing him? Are you in love with him, doll? And Peggy's like, no, like what? and Bobby, I think what's interesting about that is Bobby considers herself such a forward facing like feminist, a person who sees women and men as equal. She's like that kind of third wave feminist person, and which is represented by really her behavior, her actions, the advice that she gives Peggy. And what I like a lot about this episode is that she can't see then that version of equality where a man and a woman can be mentor and protege, because for all of her seeming progressiveness, she still wants to apply femininity within like the system, within the rules that like currently exist. And so I think that's an interesting wake-up call for her that is yet to come. So that's something I really like about the episode, because it allows Peggy to take her advice and to start, earning Don's respect and, standing up to him in a way that she wasn't before. But she's able to do that without totally subscribing to Bobby's worldview, which is you got to use your femininity, gal. You know what I mean? And also Joan, it's mirrored with Joan and Jane, who Joan is sort of like, I see what you're doing, using your what is it called? Decolletage or whatever, in order to entice the men of the office, because Joan sort of is more pragmatic than that. Joan is certainly somebody who uses her femininity to function in the workplace with an advantage that one of the few advantages she seemingly can get with her gender. It is interesting how she still has like a code of honor, right? At least now that she is engaged. So those are the things that stuck out to me the most in terms of like what makes the episode good. But a lot of the other stuff, I'm not as big of a fan of. I wanted to change the subject unless anybody had a reaction to that, to tell me to go to hell, to start reading more books about feminism, and to stop pretending, as Will just texted me, that I know anything.
No, I mean, I definitely got a lot of the same things out of it. I also appreciated that there is sort of in this episode at least, there's sort of like a femme fatale kind of energy to Bobby, and like especially with her scenes with Peggy, there is like this kind of like mystique, but there's this inherent sort of sadness to her character that it's something that is very like wanting, but she needs to have this kind of proper head on her shoulders. She needs to kind of she lives in this world where she feels like she kind of just has to push forward and often accept a lot of horrible things, as she like kind of makes light of like a incident of domestic abuse at one point. And yeah, it's just I think this is probably the most interesting I've found Bobby of the 3 episodes we've seen her in thus far. But yeah.
Oh, same.
Yeah.
By far, as much as Michael might scoff at that and say, but she's old. Yeah, I think she's pretty interesting here. But I still hate her a lot. I don't like her.
Yeah, I hate her. I just don't like her. And yeah, I agree with what you guys were saying. And I just want to say, talking about like Peggy and respect from Don, I do like that the episode ends with her, reminding him not just about the money, but then saying thank you, Don, and not Mr. Draper.
Yes, but yeah, exactly. Not like a secretary.
Exactly. But anyways,
I had to bring up the comedy of this episode because it's finally coming when Mad Men just lets itself be all goofy. We have, of course, we've already mentioned some of it. The match cut that Michael mentioned with the paddle ball, which is just it's art, is what it is. I mean, forget the French New Wave. That is actual, art. But also, I just love like when Freddie Rumsen comes out after Ken's comedic line of like, I'm Ken. And he's genuinely wounded that Jane doesn't know who he is, even though he just introduced himself the day before. And oh my gosh, when Ken is standing there, I'm trying to ask this girl out, which by the way, Ken Cosgrove is dodging such a bullet. just based on the information presented in this episode alone. And I know Will's going to balk at that because he thinks Ken Cosgrove is a hound and a half, and he is. But Will does not recognize that we can fix Ken. That he just needs our help, Will Ashton.
Just one thing at a time.
But Jane, we can't do anything about that. But Freddie Rumsen, of course, runs out and shows off his musical prowess, which we were already aware of course, because we saw him dance the twist in last season. So we know he has rhythm. And so there was that comedic scene. There was, I know what Will wants to bring up with Pete's choice of magazines.
Yeah, because like, I mean, obviously he doesn't pick it, but yeah, when he's going through the nudie magazines,
he thinks about it.
he does briefly look at the Pearl Harbor article or whatever, that magazine, and he lingers on it too long. Like, it's only a few seconds.
I think because he's confused. He's just like, I'm here to give a sample.
I know.
So like, what?
But like, he still looks at it a little too long for comfort. Like, is Pete a sick enough fuck that he's gonna get his rocks off on Pearl Harbor? And it's like, the fact that that's a legitimate question that can be asked of Pete speaks more to Pete than I think anything we've said thus far on this podcast.
But I think that leads to my biggest laugh of the episode. It never fails, is when Trudy and him are fighting, and then Trudy comes over and she's just like, I didn't think it through, and he's just like, that's honest. You guys are just staring at me blankly, but I love that line delivery.
I get it. That whole conversation is just really good with him and Trudy. It's just like, you
Trudy,
can't help yourself with just being like, you just can't help yourself just being like, at this point, becoming numb to the horrible person Pete Campbell is, and then just being like, that's Pete. I did forget about the Freddie Rumsen zipper Mozart. It's so funny because what was it like to film that? Did they actually get him to like? Does it actually sound like that? How many takes did it take? Did they have to go and post? Was it written into the script, or was that like they were offset and he was just like, "Hey guys, check this out. How do we add this in?" I did some digging and I could not find an official. I'm sure there's an interview somewhere where Matthew Weiner, probably explains it. What I like to think, and this is based on nothing, I like to think that literally they were like, we need Freddie to run in here, and he had like noticed earlier that day when they had dressed him with his like Mad Men clothes, and he had like done the zipper, and was just like, this could be it. Like, this could be the scene. That's what I want to believe. Because how do you write that? I mean, and Robin Bates is very talented, but still. That's like, have you heard Michael Schur talking about like the most mad he's ever been is when Chris Pratt said, like, I figured out what your issue is. It says here that you have internet connectivity issues. It's like, those are just the kind of jokes you just can't write. It's just spur of the moment, and it's perfect. Mm-hmm. I want to go back to Rachel again. I know we already went through the Rachel thing, and you all are heartbroken. The things between her and Don didn't work out, but I am kind of curious about something, because she what do you think propels her to go over to Don in that moment and not just leave? Because every time I see the scene, I keep thinking to myself, wouldn't she just want to pretend she didn't see him? Because, like, doesn't it hurt? Do you think it's because she feels victorious about how things turned out? I don't know if I get that sense. I get a little confused about this one. I just think she recognizes and respects and recognizes just what her and Dom shared was authentically so special and big to both of them, that she can't just ignore it. Like, she has to, like, she sees Don, she just knows, like, I'm going to have to go over there. Even if it is to get closure and have this be awkward, like, Don's not somebody I can see and just blow past. Like, this has to be acknowledged. Well, though, I keep coming back to, like, she married Tilden, and obviously we're all Tilden stans, but you got to think, Will denies that, but I know I have the receipts. I have the text messages.
I don't vouch for this man. I barely know him.
But I think you like the cut of his jib. I know I do, but I think that he's just like the safe sort of like nice person probably very kind, but I just wonder if she sees Dawn and she's just like, she wants that spice again. She wants that drama. She wants that mess. And she thinks if she goes over there, she's going to like be able to fantasize about Dawn, when she's with Tilden.
You don't think that she just kind of wants some like closure from that? Like there was like a moment.
I mean, that's what Mike keeps saying.
Right,
and that's like what responsible people who are nice and like aren't evil are saying.
I guess. I mean, I feel like this season in particular, the show by and large is focused on like characters trying to move forward into a new future, but being hung up by their past and being unable to really like progress forward in full because they're burdened by the sins of their past. And I feel like, obviously it's happening a lot with Peggy here. It's happening with Dawn. In the, like there's like, the new girl and like, this idea of like the next generation with kids and stuff. But then also with Rachel, where she moved on, like she's, put Dawn behind her and now she's going to settle down and marry this guy, even though if he's, kind of straight laced and boring, he's, stable and reliable and someone that she needs. But, there is that part of her that I think does kind of lust and yearn for what her relationship was with Dawn, even if it was erratic, even if it was unstable, even if it was something that, brought a lot of heartache and pain and confusion to her life. There is, I think, maybe something to that relationship that at the very least, I think she wants kind of like that, that bow to be tied and just kind of be able to emotionally move on. Cause I don't think she really had that closure yet in her life.
Now that you mention it, I do wonder too, if she is kind of curious about whether or not Dawn has moved on as well, because she sees Bobby Barrett and she probably sees those wedding rings that they're both married. But I think like the police officers in the drunk tank, they don't know that they're not husband and wife. They're cheating on their spouses, right? So I wonder if that's what she's she's investigating a little bit. She's like, oh, did Dawn move on too? And who is this person that he moved on with? And I think maybe that curiosity just overwhelms her. But of course, she quickly sees as she talks to them, she's like, oh, clearly this is not, like what I thought it was. Dawn is still with his wife. Because as you recall in season 1, he was like, I'm going to leave her. And he doesn't. So, yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
I also think
I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure he even said, "Fuck them kids. I'm getting out of here." Yeah. So yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
I'll provide for them. Maybe.
I was just gonna say that I admit that also my read on the situation could be informed by having seen the entire series. Like if it was my first time watching through, I think it is really plausible to watch that scene with hope and think like, oh, maybe she does miss Dawn, and maybe this will still be a thing. Because up to this point, right, I think the audience is really behind Rachel, and like Rachel is the best, and you kind of, you still don't hate Dawn enough to not want him to be happy, so you're like, this is the best thing, maybe. So I don't know.
All right, what do you guys think of the thing that Bobby says to Peggy? We spent a lot of time in Peggy's apartment. I love Peggy's apartment. She's making a real go of it. But we hear Bobby tell her, look, don't be a man, be a woman. And I'm a little conflicted about this advice because I think it's interesting. It is sort of like, feminism isn't just women and men being the same. It's them being equal, right? But it's also, there is something to like knowing who you are and your role and your identity. And I don't know, what did you think of that advice? Because I could see people coming away from it maybe saying there's something about it that it can be a little bit toxic too.
I mean, I think the advice that she gives is it's like twofold in that, if it was just like she gave bad advice and there was like a scene where Peggy's just like, listen here, this is the future and, yada, yada, it would have been a much lesser scene than what it is, where it's like she's like some of the advice she's giving is, fairly progressive and pretty mindful and, lived in experience where like she's saying like, you can't be one of the boys, you have to be a woman, but that doesn't mean you can't excel in their field. Like you just kind of have to take the things that make you different and, use that to your advantage. Which, in a broad sense is pretty good advice. But yeah, she's also so held to these old fashioned standards of what femininity is and like how to progress in these fairly outdated and, retrograde ideas. And yeah, she just can't, like we said, accept that Peggy would be able to move forward in this company based on her talents, based on her, forthrightness, based on what she can bring as, a creative. And it's something that I think just kind of eats at Bobby more than it teaches Peggy.
I think the advice John suffers just from the same like thing that you were speaking to earlier about just her lack of perspective and experience being so tied into who she's been her whole life, where she believes it's good advice. And I think there's a little bit of a nugget in it of maybe like, you know, you could listen to that advice and think she's saying like, you know, don't pretend to be a man and act like they do, just be yourself. I don't think that's actually what Bobby's saying, right? Bobby is saying like, use your femininity and, you know, manipulate your way, like use what you have to your advantage is what I do. And look how successful I am. But then at the end of the day, that isn't equality. And that isn't what, you know, feminism as we know it becomes in, you know, the 80s, 90s and where we currently are. Right.
Yeah, that exactly, because it reminds me of how Dawn says to her in the episode Indian Summer last season, you know, you presented like a man, now negotiate like one, or whatever. Right? Remember what he says there? And he's looking at her and being like, you need to act like a man in order to blah, blah, blah. And I think this is the first instance where Peggy sees Don is not infallible. Look what he just put me through. He is clearly not this perfect person, and there are other people that I can look to and learn from. Right? I mean, she learns from her advertising books too. She's not just getting all of her knowledge and mentorship from Dawn. She is, you know, as Bobby says, it's like you made yourself a copywriter. And I think that self-respect is something that Peggy, she's been frustrated this season because she doesn't have that respect yet. She's trying to get it. Like they, you know, there's the scene in the first episode where they're like, where Freddie is like, Peggy, you know, can you go do this? You know, and kind of orders her around. And she's like, and clearly she's not happy about that. She's not happy when the guys sort of exclude her. She's not happy when Dawn kind of disrespects her and looks down on her. And yeah, I think there is something there to her realizing that, yeah, I don't have to do everything Dawn says, because clearly what he values isn't subservience. What he values is fairness. And I think that when Peggy comes to him and is like, yeah, that's a lot of money to somebody like me, I think there is a reason he doesn't respond poorly to that. He's just like, yeah, you're right. You know, because he holds fairness as a value, even if he doesn't always consistently abide by it. He's a very hypocritical person, but I think that is what gets him to respect you, is when you actually show some form of like holding him accountable in a way that makes sense to him, I guess. And it's something that I don't think Betty always manages with him, for reasons that are very complicated that this episode doesn't really get into. We only get one Betty scene, which yeah, that's a tough one.
But I mean, we were kind of dancing around it, but is his potential infatuation with Bobby because she's sort of just that anti-Betty, like she's able to be self-reliant, be the pants in a relationship, and kind of be someone who is able to excel without you really having to feel that, like, I don't know. I guess that's the only real thing I can really see outside of just, you know, like a physical attraction to one another, that and the power dynamic that I can see with with Dawn being interested in Bobby.
Well, Rachel was kind of like that, but then here's the difference, right? Rachel isn't the one who made a move. Bobby always instigates. And I think there's just something happening with Dawn where he feels less guilt maybe when she's the one who's instigating and has the power to do that. And I think it speaks to something psychological about Dawn that we don't learn until like way later in the show. But the show does pay this off really, really well, of like what kind of emotional insecurity is happening with Dawn with women like Bobby. So I do want to delay that, because I know Mike knows what I'm talking about. But yeah.
I do want to kind of push back a little bit, only because that first little like affair that they have in the car, when he gets back, I feel like that's the most guilty we've seen him so far, because he like uses the soap to wash out his mouth in a way that I feel he hasn't really done that with Rachel. He does
feel guilty, but I think he feels less guilt than if he made the move.
I guess so, but I don't remember him doing anything like that when he was with Rachel.
Well, yeah, because Rachel had it going on.
Okay, I'm just saying. I mean, to kind of counteract what you were saying there a little bit.
Well, that's the thing. I think it's less, maybe because the word guilt, to your point, sort of connotates like, oh, I'm not disgusted by this. I think he is disgusted by it, but I think, again, his value is fairness, and I think he doesn't feel that culpability still when it's just being thrust upon him. He has no agency, right? And so he doesn't feel like he's responsible, right? I think that's more of what it is. He's still disgusted by it, but clearly he's also turned on by it and kind of wants it to keep going on, but he won't initiate. She's the one who calls his office. She's the one who puts a move on him in his office and invites him to the bar and starts nibbling on his ear. It's her idea to go to the beach.
She's the one that locks the door, I think, in that last episode, yeah.
It's hard to argue with John about these things when he's Mad Men omnipotent. Just, he's everywhere. He's in season 2, season 7. He knows all.
I'm in the Quora forums answering questions about I'm sorry, I could be a little bit I could be a little snooty, but it's because I watched too many French films from the 60s. I wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about Roger and Joan before we ended. I mean,
I think it's only fair that we give them the same amount of time that the show gives them, which is, I think, allotted. We give them about 37 seconds.
Roger gets one scene, I think just one. And Joan gets like a few minor things like with Jane and everything. And I don't think we'll be able to talk more about that until the season progresses further. But yeah, we get a little bit more of the closure between Roger and Joan, or at least like some kind of closure that Rachel was looking for, maybe, as Will theorized, I think, interestingly, because Joan is sort of like coming to him. And I think Joan is still kind of bitter about their relationship and seeing herself as just like another mistress to him, and Roger pushing back against that and being like, no, you meant something to me. And he gets that nice little jab of like a relatively young love. And the fact that the guy is like 34, he's like, well, what's wrong with him? And we haven't really gotten to know this guy. We will, but he certainly, we saw him once, and it's going to be a different actor, as that spoil will Ashton. I don't want you to get too confused when you see him, but we will probably have to put a pin on that, I guess. But yeah, any thoughts on the Roger Joan scene?
I still don't think the writers at this point knew what they were doing with Joan. And so I just find her so boring compared to how I find her later. And I know that's such a cop-out to a watch-along podcast, but it's just how I feel having seen the show. Joan sucks so much right now compared to how interesting she gets.
Well, do you agree with that? And I mean, I know you can't say will if she gets interesting later, but do you find her boring?
I don't find Joan boring, but I don't know what's to come. So I mean,
maybe it's a curve.
Yeah. So I don't know. I like Joan. I think she just has 2 notes, right? You get like 2 lines of her being a bitch in the office, and then you get her crying and having this weird thing with Roger, and it's always the same conversation. I don't know. Sorry. Sometimes she goes to Paul, right? And that's it.
I like the part though where she like shoos everybody away, like that little physical acting that Christina Hendricks does, where she's like, "Get away," like when the ladies are all swarming Dawn's office. Those aren't wedding bells, Miss Holloway. I don't know. She has such a way about her that I think is very fun and whimsical.
I do like Christina Hendricks' portrayal of the character. I that's not my gripe. That's gripe. I just don't like Joan's characterization up to this point.
I mean, to Mike's point, I do feel like Joan, at least in this episode, feels like kind of more of a means to end. Like she just serves like the ultimate metaphor of the story rather than feels like a character with full agency and with full, autonomy over the story and who she is in the office place. It's just kind of like she serves this metaphor about like, the future and kind of, us trying to, having some sort of inherent value in the marketplace, and someone that very much values her sexuality, very much values her femininity, and having throughout the season kind of having that fear of being aging out, and I'm wondering if that's going to tie into like something with Dawn, where you see him also fearing like this idea that he's getting older, fearing that he'll kind of lose that mojo that he has. But I guess we'll find out. You guys would know better than me, but I'll find out later.
Now that you mention, I wonder if it's the show sort of foreboding, because there's the point where Trudy says, "What is this all for?" And Trudy apparently got the first step of what she wanted, the marriage to a wonderful guy, right? And Joan is earlier in that process, and I think she's under the impression that it's smooth sailing from here on out. But the episode kind of supposes that not really, and that maybe Joan is counting her chickens before they hatch.
Yeah, we've already mentioned that like Peggy and Dawn throughout this season are kind of equals to one another in some weird way. Like they see some sort of, mutual respect is gained, and Dawn clearly values Peggy more than the other creatives because he sees a little bit of himself in her, and he sees something that, hasn't been brought to workplace, something that brings excitement to a field that he's kind of losing his luster in some ways. But I also feel like with Jane, obviously there's some stuff going on where Joan obviously sees a younger version of herself in Jane, and rather than respect it, she's kind of repulsed by it and push away from it, and like, button up your blouse, and like, like she has this inherent disrespect in the same way that she did with Peggy with season 1, and just like, yeah, she just I just think it's like stuff that's like interesting as far as like the overarching story of the narrative, but like Mike was saying, I don't feel like it gives Joan a lot more to play with that we haven't seen from other episodes at this point.
Can I say something very honest about Jane? She triggers me. You know what it is?
What's
and
that?
neither of you would fully understand, I don't think. She is such a girl of the South. And I don't think the show is like super explicit about that at any point, but there is the biggest clue is when she's like, it's like being in tall cotton. But I mean, culturally, personality wise, she is such a Southerner. And that's these are the types of people I grew up with, right? And there is that sort of very nice, but like very manipulative under the surface that I'm obviously broadly generalizing and stereotyping quite a bit, but I don't feel bad because of what Southerners put me through. Not specifically Southern girls, but like guys do this too. There's just like this, there's something about them where you're very nice on the surface, but like there's just something kind of like you were really like after something kind of sinister on the side, aren't you? And so, yeah, Jane kind of, whenever she comes on screen, I'm just like, who are you? I don't know you. I don't trust you. Not how I feel like with Tilden. Tilden, I just get the sense of like, he's true blue. Like I'd do anything for that man. I'd lay down my life.
Who in the show besides Tilden doesn't want something sinister though?
He took his gal to see a funny thing happened, which is
Trudy.
Great choice.
Trudy has no ill objectives here. Trudy just wants a kid.
Trudy deserves. She's such a sweetheart, and she deserves nothing but the world.
Yeah. So,
Daddy.
Yeah.
I still love that line delivery.
I was elated when we were in the office and learning about Pete's balls and his history with his balls dropping and stuff. I'm like, oh, good. Finally, some much needed character development for Pete.
Speaking of closure, he mentions that his dad passed away in a very similar way to how Dawn said, tells the doctor in the first episode of this season how his dad passed away. So there's some mirroring going on there too, isn't there? In terms of like both guys in the and I think it is intentional, right? Because we have the whole thing where Don finally tells Betty that that he has high blood pressure, and he hasn't told her up until now. And then, of course, what I like about that whole thread is that there are consequences for what happened, and that's now Betty knows his secret, and now Betty is going to start sort of withholding salt from him, and it's a small consequence, obviously, but it is something. It shows that like Don wasn't able to get out of this entire situation 100% scot-free.
Yeah, I remember when I had my last affair and crashed the car, I couldn't have salt for a couple months, and boy, was I pissed. What a punishment.
You really paid your dues, huh?
Yeah, I had to sneak salt. It was not fun. It was harder to sneak the salt than it was to continue the affair. But you know what kept me going on that affair was my buddy Lil Ashton texting me every other day. Affairs are awesome. Keep doing it.
I thought you were going to say, what got me through it was Pepper.
Well, Pepper is the name of the person.
Yeah, that's the joke I was going to build up with. Yeah, Pepper, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
I did appreciate that the ending of this episode is sort of the mere opposite of Todd Solondz's Happiness, a film I'm sure you both have watched and loved, like me. One of my favorite movies, Happiness.
All right, I think that's a good sign for us to move on to trivia. I didn't have too much else. I mean, we already mentioned a lot of things. We didn't touch on too much, but yeah, I mean, there is the reveal that Peggy, they haven't been like the baby we've been seeing this entire season is Anita's, because there's not like another baby in the house. And so the implication appears to be that Peggy's baby went for adoption because she was hospitalized and everything. And there have been little clues to this like throughout, but it's always something that always catches me off guard because I tend to forget, when we see the babies in the season, in those episodes, you kind of have to play coy a little bit of like, oh yeah, for the little one, because the priest thinks that that's her kid.
In the book, the Madman Carousel, I think he said that Weiner and company were very deliberately playing with audiences and like they were coy, like they wanted people to have that misconception for this reveal.
Right.
So, I mean, it's understandable that you would forget because I think that was deliberate on their part.
Right. Yeah, because it's played so straight. and it's very well done. Good storytelling. Oh yeah, I had a theory, conspiracy theory that I want you guys to disagree with. I think in this scene where Jimmy calls Don and wants to go see him, and Don gets all freaked out, but then Jimmy shows up and it's fine. He's just like, "Oh, I just wanted to thank you in person." I think he knows. I think he knows in this moment that that Bobby and Don are having an affair, but Bobby worked out something with him, similar to how they worked things out at Lutece, because there's just something very off about it. And Don senses that there's something off. Like, why would he go all the way to the office just to do that? And I think it's because he wants to see Don in person. He wants to see the broken arm. But, despite what Bobby says, I think the fact that Bobby disappeared, I think that he knows that Bobby has been seeing Don, probably because Bobby's probably been telling him. And I think that he is just sort of like, oh, he's suspicious and wants the confirmation. And so that's my conspiracy theory. And I can't say anything based on what I know to come, but I think that is like the coding of this scene. What do you guys think? Should I go to hell? Should I stop watching the show and quit media entertainment criticism?
I don't really think it's that crazy of conspiracy theory, because I think that's the entire read of the scene. You're trying to figure out, does he know or does he not? So I guess you're just saying you're on the camp that he does know. I don't think it's. I think you're just picking up on what the scene is trying to tell you.
I like that response. That response is sort of like, oh, John, this isn't a conspiracy theory. You're just watching the show and, doing the bare minimum. Yeah, I like that.
It's an amazing critique, though. You're nailing it.
Wait, so Will, are you in agreement? Do you think that was pretty obvious? And I should just,
Well, I mean, I don't think it's like quite as overt as Mike is saying, but I do think that we saw from that dinner scene that Bobby's like the only one that can kind of turn Jimmy down and can kind of make him, she is his wife, but she's also kind of like his makeshift mother. And like she's like the one person that can kind of just like she can make him kind of do whatever she needs him to do. And I could see, him getting all wound up, but then her and like the elevator going up is just like, look, like, just play it cool or whatever, and like kind of was able to elevate him down. And I don't know. I think it's in that scene, but yeah, I don't dismiss it quite as readily as Mike does.
Last thing I had before trivia, I wrote in my notes, of course, Don has high blood pressure and needs to cut down on salt. He's been eating too much Utz potato chips. All right, let's move on to trivia. I deserve that. That blank stares you guys shared. Okay. So according to the commentary in season 2, like the commentary track, it's not explicitly stated, but most of the commentators talk about having like a tighter schedule than normal for this episode because they were behind in shooting at this point in the season. And so they needed to shoot the scene with Joan showing off her ring in one shot because they were like so far behind. So apparently they had to like move this up a lot more. So it's kind of interesting that like the criticism this episode tends to get is like the things don't come together. And it seems to be that, like they kind of had to like insert some of this stuff in order to like make the whole season work. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Maybe that's why the episode feels a little disjointed and addressing some of our concerns. Okay. The questions asked by the doctor when Peter is getting grilled about, what, they're from an actual fertility pamphlet from 1960. So the questions he's asking literally are like things they would ask in that time. So very good attention to detail. And according to Matthew Weiner, he actually knew the doctor who wrote the pamphlet. So he was like literally like, drawing that upon, probably what his parents were asking of like, why is our kid so weird? We just get the feeling that he's going to make a TV show and cast his own kid as like this really weird kid. I'm sure that's what happened. Another piece of trivia here. Robin Vaith is the one who wrote Bobby's character. And Robin Vaith, we've talked about her. She was the one who did like the birdies, the bird scene where Betty shoots the birds and everything. She was also a co-writer on the end of the episode. She did a lot of reading on French feminism in order to write Bobby's character. And French feminism, according to this trivia, is that women are just as smart and capable as men, but they are smarter than them, and they should use their physical assets against them. Now, I don't fully agree with that idea of French feminism as applied necessarily. I don't see it as sort of like, I think that they are framed as smarter than men in a very deliberate sense. Like, but that's more like literary criticism that we don't have to get into. I know Will has always said that he believes that women are smarter than men and should use their physical assets against them because, yeah. No response, Wash?
Sure.
Well, it's just because when we went to college, you get more knowledge, and we all went to Jupiter to get more stupider.
That is true. That is correct, yeah.
A lot of people started cracking up on set when the cop brought up the legal blood alcohol level of 0.15%. Obviously, that's like almost double what the legal limit is today in most states, which is 0.08. Yeah, I mean, I love that whole cop in general, like his delivery. I was like, people's kids are on that street, sir. Like the way he's doing it. He hammed it up. I loved it. Oh yeah, so Bobby mentioned something about she's at a fat farm, but they weren't called fat farms in the 1960s. They're actually called milk farms back then, but the writers didn't think anyone would understand the term. So one of those rare moments where they actually try to do something like, I think they purposely were like, we got to use the term even though it's not accurate, just because for the sake of understandability, which I get. I don't think it's a big deal. It does tank the entire episode though, bring it down an entire letter grade. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Well, the bathroom scene with Pete, your favorite scene. That originally was not in the script.
Okay.
You were almost going to hate this episode. So they decided to shoot it while shooting the episode. They decided to let's actually show this because why not? And Matthew Weiner.
Let's see Pete just fucking get his rocks off, man.
Yeah. But Matthew Weiner was sold on the idea because he knew the next scene was going to be Roger with the paddle ball. So it turns out that that was a happy accident, as certain directors would say.
What else are happy accidents?
Yeah, I was waiting for that one. Walked right into it. In the commentary track for season 2, Elizabeth Moss says that John Hamm made her cry the way that he delivered his lines during the flashback scenes. And according to the director of the episode, Jennifer Getzinger, there wasn't a dry eye on set. So specifically the part where he's just like, forget this ever happened. Get out of here. Move forward. That really toxic thing where he's just like, don't embrace your problems. Don't deal with things head on. Everyone was just like, oh my gosh, how sweet.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's, I don't know. That does kind of tie into, like I was saying before, this idea of you have to push forward, but you're going to always be haunted by your past. But I mean, there's that one line he says where it's just like, you'll be shocked by how much you don't remember it or whatever. It's just
it'll shock you how much this never happened.
But I feel like that's always, I don't know, I was just gonna say, I mean, it just felt like Don's still trying to convince himself that that's the case with his brother, where he's
he says, which a lot of mirroring with 5G in this episode, right. But also, I mean, with because he has the same conversation with Adam, but also I think that when he's saying this, I think what's making people emotional is just that he comes through for Peggy here. And, I think that there is something kind of emotional, like what he's doing for her, because clearly he is, accepting her and sees the talent in her and values it. And so, yeah, I think that's really, I think that's what contributes to it.
Especially when you look at, Pete's dad dies and, he goes to Don looking for that kind of mentorship and help and advice. And Don's like, fucking go home, dude, and he shows up for Peggy. So you can just see the different levels of respect and effort that he'd go through. Also, do you think John Hamm has ever used that line, especially back when he was having some issues with being an alcoholic, he was drunk and did something and looked at someone and it was like, forget this ever happened.
Well,
you'd be amazed.
I don't know how much you know about John Hamm's past, but I think there's certainly some things that he'd rather forget.
Dang. Okay. Well, I didn't think this was going to become John Hamm men.
Oh man. Speaking of John Hamm, Mike, did you see that interview that John Slattery did where apparently John Hamm was so attractive on the set of Mad Men that people, men and women, would just forget their lines looking at John Hamm's face?
The people have been posting tweets.
I did see that.
Random, yeah. You could kind of see the confusion on their faces, what's my next line? I love it. A couple pieces of trivia left before we go. Everyone cheered at the end of the read-through when Peggy calls Don by his first name instead of Mr. Draper. And a little part of me cheered too. It was a pretty great moment. And then the last piece of trivia here, I don't have any context for this. It just says the kids scarfed down the meatloaf during the shooting of the last scene. I like to think that they were like, oh, ours does have salt, and they just ate it really quick or something. I don't even know, because it is kind of weird. But apparently they were hungry. I don't know.
Well, I mean,
It looked good.
in the business, you kind of have to learn with time that like you're not really like during eating scenes, you're not supposed to like chow down unless the scene calls for it because you're going to be filming that scene, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. But they're still young.
Spit buckets.
Maybe they're just like, yeah, food time. Meatloaf. I love meatloaf. Let's dig in.
I appreciate.
Weiner really taught them a lesson though when he reshot that scene 9 more times, and it's like, well, you got to keep eating the same amount. Those kids were puking for days.
Yeah,
real
he's
Kubrick
like,
style.
Who put the salt back on the table? We got to do this all over again.
All right. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Mad Men Men. Thank you both for being men shiz with this episode. And we'll be back next week for Maiden Form, which is episode 6. And I forget what happens in Maiden Form. It's been a while. So I have a feeling this is an episode I don't like as much based on my memories of season 2. We'll see. Let's hope for the best.
Let's hope for the best.